Trade policies have long been central to the economic strategies of nations, influencing patterns of production, consumption, and investment. The relationship between trade policies and economic growth is complex, multifaceted, and has evolved significantly over time, shaped by historical experience, theoretical advancements, and empirical evidence. Understanding how trade policies affect economic growth requires a nuanced exploration of both their direct and indirect effects, the mechanisms through which they operate, and the contexts in which they are implemented. At the most fundamental level, trade policies refer to the set of rules, regulations, tariffs, quotas, and agreements that govern the flow of goods and services across borders. These policies can be broadly categorized as either protectionist or liberalizing. Protectionist trade policies, such as tariffs and import quotas, are designed to shield domestic industries from foreign competition, while liberalizing policies, such as free trade agreements and tariff reductions, aim to facilitate cross-border exchange and integration into the global economy. The choice between these approaches has profound implications for economic growth, influencing not only the allocation of resources within an economy, but also its exposure to international competition, innovation, and technological progress. Historically, the debate over the optimal stance on trade policy has oscillated between advocates of protectionism and proponents of free trade. In the mercantilist era of the 16th to 18th centuries, nations sought to accumulate wealth by maximizing exports and minimizing imports, often through high tariffs and restrictive regulations. This approach was premised on the belief that national prosperity was a zero-sum game, with one nation's gain coming at another's expense. However, the advent of classical economics in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, particularly through the works of Adam Smith and David Ricardo, challenged this view. Smith's concept of absolute advantage and Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage provided a powerful rationale for free trade, arguing that all nations could benefit from specialization and exchange based on their relative efficiencies. The theoretical case for free trade rests on several pillars. First, by allowing countries to specialize in the production of goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage. Trade increases overall efficiency and output. Second, access to larger markets enables firms to achieve economies of scale, reducing costs and fostering innovation. Third, exposure to international competition acts as a spur to productivity improvement, as domestic producers must innovate and become more efficient to survive. Fourth, trade facilitates the diffusion of technology and knowledge across borders, accelerating the pace of innovation and economic development. These mechanisms suggest that, all else being equal, open trade policies should promote faster economic growth. Empirical evidence generally supports the positive association between trade openness and economic growth. Although the relationship is not always straightforward, numerous cross-country studies have found that countries with more open trade regimes tend to grow faster than those with restrictive policies. For example, the rapid economic growth experienced by East Asian economies, such as South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore in the latter half of the 20th century, has often been attributed to their export-oriented development strategies, which emphasized integration into global markets. Conversely, many countries in Latin America and Africa that pursued inward-looking, import substitution industrialization, ISI, strategies during the same period experienced slower growth and stagnation. However, the impact of trade policies on economic growth is mediated by a host of other factors, including the quality of institutions, the level of human capital, the structure of the economy, and the stage of development. Trade liberalization can generate significant benefits, but it can also impose adjustment costs, particularly in the short run. Sectors exposed to foreign competition may contract, leading to job losses and social dislocation, while the gains from trade may be unevenly distributed across regions and population groups. The ability of an economy to reap the full benefits of trade depends on its capacity to adapt, invest in education and infrastructure, and implement complementary policies that support structural transformation and social inclusion. One of the most important channels through which trade policies affect economic growth is resource allocation. In a closed economy, resources may be allocated inefficiently due to protectionist barriers that insulate domestic industries from competition. By contrast, open trade policies expose firms to international market signals, encouraging the reallocation of resources towards sectors where the country has a comparative advantage. This process enhances productivity as resources flow from less efficient to more efficient uses. Over time, this dynamic can lead to higher aggregate output and income, reinforcing the growth process. Another critical mechanism is the impact of trade on innovation and technological progress. Access to global markets provides firms with incentives to innovate, as they face greater competition and have opportunities to learn from international best practices. Trade also facilitates the transfer of technology, either through imports of capital goods, foreign direct investment, or participation in global value chains. These channels can accelerate the diffusion of new ideas, processes, and products, boosting productivity and growth. The experience of China since its accession to the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2001 illustrates this dynamic vividly. By opening its markets and integrating into global supply chains, China attracted massive inflows of foreign investment and technology, which played a key role in its rapid industrialization and economic expansion. However, the benefits of trade liberalization are not automatic or guaranteed. The process of opening up an economy to international competition can be disruptive, particularly for industries that are uncompetitive or heavily protected. In the short term, trade liberalization may lead to job losses, firm closures, and social unrest, especially if safety nets and adjustment policies are inadequate. Moreover, the distributional effects of trade can be significant, with some groups gaining and others losing. Addressing these challenges requires careful policy design, including investments in education and training, active labor market policies, and targeted support for affected sectors and communities. The relationship between trade policies and economic growth is also influenced by the broader institutional and policy environment. Countries with strong institutions, effective governance, and sound macroeconomic policies are better positioned to capitalize on the opportunities created by trade liberalization. In contrast, weak institutions, corruption, and policy instability can undermine the potential gains from trade, leading to disappointing outcomes. The experience of sub-Saharan Africa in the 1980s and 1990s, where trade liberalization was often implemented in the context of weak institutions and macroeconomic instability, highlights the importance of complementary reforms in ensuring that trade openness translates into sustained growth. In addition to tariffs and quotas, non-tariff barriers, NTBs, such as technical standards, licensing requirements, and sanitary regulations can also have a significant impact on trade flows and economic growth. While some NTBs serve legitimate public policy objectives, such as protecting health and safety, others may be used as disguised forms of protectionism. The proliferation of NTBs in recent years has complicated the task of trade liberalization, requiring greater international cooperation and harmonization of standards. Addressing non-tariff barriers is particularly important for developing countries, which often face significant obstacles in accessing advanced markets due to stringent regulatory requirements. Regional and multilateral trade agreements have played a critical role in shaping trade policies and promoting economic growth. Agreements such as the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, the European Union, EU, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, have facilitated the creation of large, integrated markets, fostering cross-border investment, technology transfer, and economic convergence. At the multilateral level, the WTO has provided a framework for the gradual reduction of trade barriers and the resolution of disputes. However, the rise of bilateral and regional agreements in recent years reflects both the opportunities and challenges of deeper economic integration, as countries seek to balance the benefits of openness with the need to address specific concerns and sensitivities. The impact of trade policies on economic growth also varies across sectors and regions within countries. Export-oriented sectors, such as manufacturing and agriculture, often benefit from increased market access and scale economies, while import-competing sectors may face greater competitive pressures. Regional disparities can emerge as some areas integrate more successfully into global markets, attracting investment and generating employment, while others lag behind. Managing these disparities requires targeted policies to promote regional development, infrastructure investment, and skills upgrading. The role of trade policies in promoting economic diversification is another important consideration. For many developing countries, reliance on a narrow range of primary commodities exposes them to terms of trade shocks and volatility. Trade liberalization can facilitate diversification by providing access to new markets, technologies, and inputs, enabling countries to move up the value chain and develop more sophisticated industries. However, successful diversification also depends on the availability of human capital, infrastructure, and supportive institutions. Environmental considerations have become increasingly important in the design and implementation of trade policies. The expansion of trade can have both positive and negative environmental effects, depending on the nature of the goods traded, the regulatory framework, and the capacity for sustainable resource management. On the one hand, trade can promote the diffusion of environmentally friendly technologies and practices, contributing to sustainable development. On the other hand, it can exacerbate environmental degradation if production shifts to countries with weaker regulations or if the scale of economic activity outpaces the capacity for environmental management. Integrating environmental objectives into trade policy through measures such as eco-labeling, environmental standards, and green trade agreements is essential for ensuring that economic growth is sustainable in the long run. The digital revolution and the rise of e-commerce have added new dimensions to the relationship between trade policies and economic growth. Digital trade reduces transaction costs, expands market access, and enables small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, to participate in global value chains. However, realizing the full potential of digital trade requires policies that address issues such as data privacy, cybersecurity, intellectual property protection, and cross-border data flows. Countries that adapt their trade policies to the digital age are likely to experience faster and more inclusive economic growth. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted both the vulnerabilities and the resilience of global trade systems. Disruptions to supply chains, restrictions on the movement of goods and people, and shifts in demand patterns have underscored the importance of flexible and adaptive trade policies. In the aftermath of the pandemic, many countries are re-evaluating their trade strategies, seeking to balance openness with resilience and security. The challenge is to design trade policies that support economic recovery, foster innovation, and enhance the capacity to respond to future shocks. In sum, trade policies are a vital lever for promoting economic growth, but their effectiveness depends on a range of contextual factors and complementary measures. While the theoretical and empirical evidence generally supports the case for trade openness, the process of liberalization must be managed carefully to ensure that the benefits are widely shared and that adjustment costs are minimized. Policymakers must balance the objectives of efficiency, equity, and sustainability, taking into account the specific circumstances of their countries and the evolving dynamics of the global economy. A critical aspect of the trade growth nexus is the sequencing and pacing of trade liberalization. Rapid, poorly sequenced liberalization can overwhelm domestic industries and labor markets, leading to economic dislocation and political backlash. Gradual liberalization, accompanied by capacity building and institutional strengthening, can help economies adjust more smoothly and maximize the long-term gains from trade. The experiences of successful reformers, such as Chile and Vietnam, highlight the importance of a pragmatic, phased approach to trade policy reform. Another important consideration is the role of trade facilitation measures in supporting economic growth. Reducing administrative barriers, improving customs procedures, and investing in transport and logistics infrastructure can significantly enhance the efficiency of cross-border trade. These measures are particularly important for landlocked and low-income countries, which often face high trade costs and limited connectivity. International initiatives such as the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement aim to support these efforts by promoting best practices and providing technical assistance. The interplay between trade policies and foreign direct investment, FDI, is also central to understanding their impact on economic growth. Open trade regimes tend to attract higher levels of FDI, as multinational firms seek to take advantage of market access, lower costs, and integration into global value chains. FDI brings not only capital, but also technology, managerial expertise, and access to international networks, all of which can contribute to productivity growth and economic development. Policies that encourage both trade and investment, while safeguarding against negative spillovers such as environmental degradation or tax avoidance, are essential for maximizing the growth benefits. The role of trade policies in fostering inclusive growth is increasingly recognized as a key policy challenge. While trade can generate significant aggregate gains, its benefits are not always evenly distributed. Inequality can increase if certain sectors, regions, or groups are left behind. Addressing these disparities requires proactive policies to support skills development, social protection, and access to opportunities for all citizens. Gender-sensitive trade policies, for example, can help ensure that women participate fully in the benefits of trade and economic growth. The global trading system itself is undergoing significant changes, with rising protectionism, trade tensions, and shifts in the balance of economic power. The emergence of new economic powers, the proliferation of regional trade agreements, and debates over issues such as intellectual property, labor standards, and digital trade are reshaping the landscape of international commerce. Navigating these challenges requires adaptive, forward-looking trade policies that can respond to new realities while preserving the core principles of openness, fairness, and cooperation. In conclusion, trade policies are a powerful tool for shaping the trajectory of economic growth. Their impact is mediated by a complex array of factors, including the structure of the economy, the quality of institutions, and the broader policy environment. While open trade policies generally promote greater efficiency, innovation, and growth, their implementation must be carefully managed to ensure that the benefits are widely shared and that potential risks are mitigated. The experience of countries around the world underscores the importance of a balanced, context-specific approach to trade policy, one that combines openness with resilience, inclusivity, and sustainability. As the global economy continues to evolve, the challenge for policymakers is to design and implement trade policies that support dynamic, equitable, and sustainable economic growth for all.